My name is Eleanor Whitaker, 65. The morning sun slanted through the wide windows of my Charleston home, painting golden streaks across the hardwood floors. The scent of pumpkin pie, cinnamon, and roasted turkey mingled with the crisp tang of autumn leaves drifting in from the open porch door. I moved from room to room, setting plates and arranging silverware, my hands steady but my heart fluttering with anticipation. Today, my family was coming. I paused at the kitchen counter, letting my fingers brush the worn edges of the cutting board. I'd spent the past week preparing, not just the food, but the house itself. The living room smelled faintly of polished oak, and the fireplace logs were stacked neatly, ready for a fire that would cast soft shadows over the faces of my guests. It was perfect, I thought, almost too perfect. I caught sight of my reflection in the window above the sink, hair streaked with silver, laugh lines etched deep around my eyes, a posture still upright despite decades of late nights, grading papers and raising children. Eleanor Whitaker, 65. A woman who had learned to rely on herself more than anyone else. Today, though, I wanted them to see me the daughter, the mother, the grandmother, the one who had poured love into every corner of this home. The doorbell rang, and I felt a familiar surge of nervous excitement. Alex, my son, would be the first to arrive. His laughter had always carried across these rooms like sunlight, but lately, something had shifted. The last few months had felt different, heavier. Still, I straightened my apron and opened the door, forcing a smile that I hoped didn't betray the unease curling in my chest. Alex's grin was wide, his eyes bright, and for a moment, I allowed myself to remember the boy who had once clutched my hand in the grocery store line, insisting he could carry the canned pumpkin. Now he stood tall, a man who thought he knew the world, carrying an envelope that looked far too formal for a simple holiday greeting. Behind him, my brother, Peter, and his fiancée stepped up the porch. They were laughing about something I couldn't hear, their voices mingling with the crunch of leaves underfoot. And then my parents, careful not to slip on the steps, smiling politely, holding a small dish wrapped in foil. Their faces were familiar, comforting even, but a tension lingered in the air that made my stomach tighten. I guided them inside, the front door clicking softly behind them. The room felt alive with chatter and the clatter of silverware being set. But there was a subtle edge beneath it, something unsaid that prickled at my senses. I moved to the table, arranging the final pieces, aware of the envelope Alex still held in his hand. I didn't know it yet, but that small envelope would change the day, and perhaps everything I thought I knew about family. With everyone seated and the first whispers of conversation starting, Alex reached across the table, offering me the envelope with a grin that seemed almost too bright, too careful. I took it, feeling its weight in my hand, and slid the flap open. Inside, a folded piece of paper waited. Alex slid the envelope across the table with a precision that made me pause. It wasn't tucked among the napkins or perched beside the pumpkin pie like a casual card. It sat deliberately in front of me, crisp and stiff, the kind of paper used for official documents. My fingers hovered for a moment, hesitant. Something about it felt off. The room quieted, the laughter dimmed, and I realized everyone was watching me. My parents exchanged small glances. Peter leaned back in his chair, and Alex's grin didn't waver. There was a careful polish to it, an almost theatrical brightness that made the pit in my stomach grow. I took the envelope gently, as if handling a fragile ornament. The edges were sharp beneath my fingertips. I noticed how Alex's eyes flicked toward me, sharp and expectant, while Peter's fiancée shifted in her seat, a subtle arch of an eyebrow. Even my mother's hand rested lightly on the table, tapping in a rhythm that felt too measured. It was a performance, all of it, and I was at the center. I broke the seal slowly, savoring the tension that tightened around my chest. The room held its breath with me. Inside, a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored paper was folded neatly. I lifted it out, feeling the crispness beneath my fingers. At first glance, it seemed ordinary typed words in precise lines, but the weight of it told me otherwise. Alex leaned forward slightly. "Go ahead, Mom," he said, his voice light, casual, as if nudging me toward something I couldn't yet grasp. "Open it." I unfolded the paper carefully, my eyes scanning the top lines. The familiar cursive of Alex's signature was there, crisp and deliberate. My stomach twisted. The words didn't sink in immediately, but the tone did. Formal, cold, calculated. Not playful, not a note of gratitude or a simple holiday greeting. Something sharp threaded through each line. Something I hadn't felt from him or any of them in years. I felt the room's air thicken, the scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon fading into the background. The paper trembled slightly in my hands, and my pulse picked up. My parents were still watching, their expressions soft but unreadable. Peter's lips pressed together, trying to hide a smirk. Alex's eyes gleamed, a careful mask that didn't reach the corners of his mouth. I took a deep breath, feeling the edges of panic brush against the calm I had carried so far this morning. I had faced challenges before. Paying for repairs when a pipe burst, helping a neighbor in need, navigating the bureaucracy of a city permit. But this was different. This was personal. I could feel it in my bones. A cold, precise weight settling into my chest. The room remained quiet, each clatter of utensils now a distant echo. My hands unfolded the paper fully, and the words hit me in a wave of disbelief. The envelope, the careful smiles, the polished calm of Alex, they had all been designed to bring me to this moment, to make me feel small, to make me feel caught. I lifted my gaze, steadying myself. Everyone in the room was still watching. My parents, their hands poised as if to comfort, yet holding back. Peter, leaning just slightly forward, curiosity flickering in his eyes. And Alex, still smiling, still expecting the reaction that he thought was inevitable. I folded the letter slowly, letting the tension settle into a quiet, controlled energy. My fingers clenched around the edges. The paper's weight now a kind of promise. I allowed a small, deliberate smile to form, one that didn't reach Alex's eyes but carried every ounce of awareness I wanted to keep hidden. The meal continued around us, the conversations resuming, though the room had changed. A subtle charge hung in the air, unspoken, a line drawn invisibly between what had been and what was now set in motion. I knew, in that moment, that nothing in this room or in my life would be the same after this envelope. I unfolded the letter slowly, letting the crease in the middle open like a hinge to a new reality. The words were typed cleanly, each one precise, deliberate, almost clinical. At first, I didn't understand. My eyes scanned and re-scanned the page, hoping some trick of the light or the ink would reveal a mistake. A footnote that this was a joke. A prank meant to shock and amuse. But there was nothing. It was real. Notice of eviction. The bold heading announced. My name was printed neatly beneath it, followed by my address. The very house I had built with my own hands, brick by brick, year by year, after decades of labor, sacrifice, and devotion. And then I saw it, the signatures, Alex's, at the bottom right, confident and clean, and alongside his, faint but unmistakable, the initials of my parents, Mom and Dad, as though they had signed off on some grand decision that had nothing to do with love or family. My hands froze. The paper trembled slightly, as if aware of the weight it carried. I tried to swallow, to speak, but no sound emerged. The laughter and chatter around the table blurred into a distant hum. The warmth of the kitchen, the smells of roasted turkey and cinnamon, everything I had prepared, dissolved into a haze of disbelief. Alex's grin remained fixed, expectant, almost smug. Peter shifted slightly in his chair, his posture casual, but his eyes glinting with curiosity. My parents smiled faintly, a polite, almost rehearsed gesture that cut through me sharper than any words could. "Mom," Alex said lightly, "it's just time. You've stayed here too long." His tone was almost cheerful, the kind of tone that masks cruelty with civility. "It's for the best." I blinked, fighting to process the sentence. Stayed here. Too long, I repeated in my head, feeling the sting of each word. This house. This sanctuary. My accomplishment. My labor of love, it had been theirs as much as mine to cherish. Yet now it was being stripped away with a few strokes of a pen. My chest tightened. My throat burned. I swallowed hard, forcing a calm I didn't feel. They had taken everything for granted. They had assumed my compliance, my silence, my love. And in that assumption, they revealed their misunderstanding of who I really was. I thought of the years I had spent paying mortgages, covering medical bills for Dad when he fell ill, lending money to Peter to start his small business, buying Mom the car she wanted, never asking for repayment, never keeping score. Every sacrifice, every late night, every penny saved to maintain this home, they had believed it was nothing, that my devotion was infinite and unquestioned. Tears stung the corners of my eyes, but I did not cry. Not here. Not now. I set the letter down on the table in front of me, letting it rest like a weight on my palms. I looked at Alex, and for the first time that day, I smiled, not in agreement, not in weakness, but in quiet understanding. They thought they had won. They thought I would fold, beg, vanish quietly into the night. But I had learned something invaluable over the decades. Family, as I had believed it, was defined by love and loyalty, not by blood or proximity. And what I had assumed, what they had relied upon, was no longer a guarantee. The room remained alive with conversation, but the space around me felt still, charged. I could hear Mom's polite murmurs, Peter's low chuckles, Alex's easy assurances, all floating around me. Unaware of the shift, I let the letter sit there, a silent witness. I had no idea yet how I would respond, but one thing was certain. They had no idea what I was capable of. The calm they mistook for submission was merely the surface. Beneath it, a quiet fire was igniting, a resolve I hadn't needed before but now recognized as essential. I folded the eviction notice slowly and set it aside, letting my eyes drift to the window where the sunlight gleamed across the porch. The house was mine in every memory, every beam, every brick, and I would protect it, even if it meant showing them just how wrong they had been. I lowered the eviction notice slowly onto the polished oak table, letting it rest there like a stone, and finally allowed my eyes to wander across the faces gathered around me. Alex leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a self-satisfied smile curling at the corners of his mouth. There was a gleam in his eyes that was unmistakable pride. Yes, but also the faintest hint of triumph. As if he had staged this moment for maximum impact. He didn't say anything, just watched me, confident that I would react as he expected. Peter shifted in his seat, folding his hands neatly in front of him. He wasn't laughing, but there was a subtle smirk, a shadow of amusement that flickered across his features. I had seen that look before during family dinners. Moments when they thought a small victory in conversation or manipulation proved their superiority. That same look now dripped with something far colder, and I felt a pang of disappointment sharper than any I had anticipated. Mom and Dad sat at opposite ends of the table, their expressions carefully measured. My mother's hands rested lightly on the tablecloth, fingertips brushing together as if she were trying to steady herself, or perhaps to steady me. Her smile was gentle, but it didn't reach her eyes. It never did. Not in these moments of subtle cruelty. My father's jaw was tight, his posture erect, a calm that bordered on rigidity. Neither of them spoke, yet I could feel their approval, quiet and unwavering, resting behind that composed exterior. I studied them all, committing every detail to memory, every twitch of a lip, every glance, every subtle shift in posture carried a weight they didn't even recognize. This wasn't a simple oversight or a miscalculation. This was a calculated choice, a decision to strip me of something I had built with my own hands. They had taken my years of hard work, my devotion, my sacrifices, and reduced it to a mere transaction, a footnote in their own narrative of entitlement. The room hummed with the clatter of dishes and faint conversation from the edge of the table, but it all felt distant, muted. The only reality that mattered was the way they looked at me, calm yet cold, proud yet cruel, affectionate in appearance but absent in loyalty. It was a pain deeper than any physical wound, a wound inflicted not with hands but with intent. Masked by smiles and civility, I realized then how blind I had been. I had assumed love and family were guarantees, constants that could not be challenged. I had given freely, offered help without counting the cost, trusted implicitly that blood and shared history meant something, but they had shown me otherwise. Their loyalty was conditional, their affection transactional. They had never truly seen me, not the woman who had labored endlessly to provide for them, not the woman who had carried the weight of responsibility quietly, and certainly not the woman who could, if needed, stand apart and make her own decisions. And yet, in their eyes, I saw something else, a faint hesitation, a crack in the confidence they thought unshakable. They didn't know me as well as they believed. They had never accounted for the quiet fire that burned beneath my calm exterior. I could feel it now, stirring gently, but steadily, a readiness I had never needed before. Tempered by years of experience and patience, the eviction notice lay between us, a silent witness to the choices they had made, and I let my gaze drift from face to face, absorbing every nuance. I wasn't angry yet, not really. I was calculating, assessing, understanding. The room had changed, though no one else seemed to notice. It had shifted from a place of celebration to a theater of revelation, and I was no longer the audience. I took a slow, deliberate breath, folding my hands in my lap and keeping my expression neutral. They thought they had won. They thought I would crumble, but I had seen their faces, felt the weight of their intentions, and understood the measure of their cruelty. They had underestimated me, and I would let them continue believing that, for now. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the sounds of the present fade, letting my mind drift back to the years when this house was nothing more than a pile of bricks and empty rooms. I remembered the first day I laid the foundation, the soil loose beneath my boots, the sun already hot on my back before it had even risen fully. Every brick, every beam, every nail had passed through my hands, my sweat and my determination making this house more than just walls and windows. It was a testament to what I could accomplish on my own. I had been 38 then, juggling 2 jobs to make ends meet, days at the schoolhouse, evenings at the diner, nights in the dim glow of a desk lamp, signing mortgage papers or reviewing blueprints. I often slept 4 hours, no more, letting exhaustion pile on top of exhaustion. My hands were calloused, my muscles sore, my mind constantly calculating, planning, sacrificing. Yet I had never complained, not aloud. I had learned long ago that perseverance required silence, that strength was measured not by words, but by action. I thought of the weekends spent at the lumber yard, loading boards into my little truck, my arms aching, my fingers scraped by splinters, and then driving home to meet the contractor, the plumber, or the electrician, making sure everything was just so. Sometimes Peter would call, asking for a loan for his business venture. I would write the check. Not because I approved blindly, but because I trusted that a family member's dream deserved support. Mom needed a car for errands paid. Dad's hospital bills mounted one winter paid. Every sacrifice, every favor, every sleepless night had been done quietly, without expectation of repayment or recognition. I had been the center of a family that depended on me, though I hadn't realized it fully at the time. My love had been assumed, my loyalty taken for granted, and here they were now, the very people I had labored for, holding an eviction notice in front of me, as if all that effort could be dismissed with a single piece of paper. Yet even in those memories, there was joy. I remembered Peter's first successful business meeting, the pride in Alex's eyes when he finally learned to ride his bike without training wheels, the small smile my mother gave when I brought home a perfectly ripe pumpkin for pie. The house was never just mine, it was ours, or so I had believed. I had invested not only money and labor, but my hope, my trust, and my love into its walls. Every room held a story, every corner a memory, every beam a piece of my resilience. But that foundation I had built with sweat and care was now being threatened by the very people I had upheld with that same devotion. The weight of it pressed down on me. But rather than crushing me, it reminded me of my capacity to endure, to persist, to stand tall when others assumed I would collapse. I could feel that old strength rising within me, not fueled by anger, but by the knowledge of what I had created, what I had achieved alone. I opened my eyes slowly, letting the present intrude again, the smell of roasted turkey, the chatter around the table, the subtle tension still hanging in the air. I glanced at Alex, then at Peter, then at my parents, their casual smiles, their small gestures, their confidence. They had no idea the woman in their midst was the same one who had lifted beams, carried boards, paid bills, and managed the impossible. Day after day, year after year, the house, every brick and beam of it, was more than property. It was a record of my life, a testament to my persistence, my sacrifice, my independence. And even now, with betrayal sitting across the table from me, I could feel the quiet truth settle. Family might be defined by blood, but loyalty, integrity, and respect are built. They cannot be assumed, borrowed, or demanded. They must be earned, and I had done far more than my share. I sat back in my chair, the eviction notice still lying on the table like a silent accusation. The clatter of forks and murmured conversation continued around me, but I barely noticed it. My mind drifted, tracing every choice, every sacrifice I had made for this family, each one now illuminated in the harsh light of their indifference. I had given them everything they asked for, sometimes more than they even realized. Peter had needed a down payment for his first office lease, and I had signed the checks without hesitation. Alex had asked for extra tutoring fees and summer camps beyond my means, and I had found a way to cover them. My parents had always expected I would be there for their every need: medical bills, car repairs, errands, favors that went unacknowledged. I had done it all without complaint, convinced that family meant devotion and loyalty in return. And now, here they were, holding a paper that claimed my home, my years of labor, my pride, my sanctuary as if it belonged to them. The cold precision of their signatures told me everything I needed to know. They had assumed my compliance, counted on my silence, and never once questioned whether I had limits. I thought about the subtle patterns that had hinted at this betrayal over the years, the dismissive glances when I declined a request, the casual laughter at my expense when I offered help that went unthanked, the whispered conversations I pretended not to hear. Each incident had been small, almost imperceptible, yet together they formed a mosaic of disregard. I had chosen to overlook them in the name of family, believing that love could bridge any distance, excuse any lapse, and erase any slight. But love without respect is fragile. I understood that now. Loyalty cannot be assumed. It must be nurtured and reciprocated. And theirs was absent, thin as a shadow, wavering and unreliable. That realization stung more than the notice itself, more than the thought that they could so easily dismiss my years of dedication. I pressed my palms to my eyes, feeling the heat of rising tears, not of sorrow, but of clarity. I had been blind to their capacity for self-interest, blind to the fact that blood alone would not secure their faithfulness. The years I had invested the energy, the patience, the love had been met with entitlement, not gratitude. My family had miscalculated the woman sitting before them. A slow, deliberate resolve settled over me, replacing the shock and hurt with a quiet determination. Their betrayal would not define me. The weight they placed upon me, their expectation of submission, their assumption that I would yield was heavy, but it was a weight I could bear and transform. I could not change the past, but I could shape the future, and I would do so with intention and precision. I glanced at Alex, still seated across from me, his expression smug and expectant. I imagined the arrogance that comes from thinking the world revolves around one's own cleverness. He had assumed I would fold, that I would let this go without resistance. He had underestimated the depth of my patience and the strength I had cultivated through decades of challenge. I inhaled slowly, feeling my chest expand with a calm I hadn't expected to possess. Hurt had given way to resolve. Anger might have burned hot for a moment, but determination was steadier, more enduring. I would act, not from impulsive rage, but from calculated intent. They had tested me, and I had passed the first measure of my own endurance. I had not faltered. The room continued its polite chatter, oblivious to the storm that had quietly gathered at its center. I folded my hands in my lap and let the clarity settle over me. I would respond in a way they could never anticipate. I would remind them, in the only way that mattered, that devotion is not owed and respect is never assumed. And with that thought, I felt the first spark of a plan begin to take shape. Small and deliberate, like the first brick laid in a foundation that would support something far stronger than anger, something that would endure. I moved quietly through the rooms, each step measured, deliberate. The house was still, the chatter of my family having faded into background noise somewhere beyond the kitchen doorway. I began packing my belongings, not hurriedly, not frantically, but with calm precision, the way I had approached every challenge in my life. I opened drawers and cupboards, selecting only what I needed, what mattered. Old letters from friends, photographs of holidays long past, the quilt Alex had made in his first grade class, all carefully wrapped and placed in boxes. Each item felt heavier than its weight in paper and fabric, carrying decades of memory, effort, and love. I noticed the sunlight falling across the floorboards and paused to breathe it in. This house had seen laughter, tears, milestones, and quiet mornings alike. Every corner held a piece of my life, a testament to years of labor, sacrifice, and endurance. And yet, today, it felt simultaneously mine and theirs, stolen from me in a way words could not capture. No tears came, though my chest tightened with the weight of it all. No pleas, no desperate attempts to reclaim what they had taken. There was no point. I had learned long ago that weakness is fleeting, and the strength of resolve endures. I folded clothing neatly, stacking them in boxes as though each layer were a brick in the foundation of something stronger than anger, something deliberate and patient. I paused by the window and glanced out at the garden. The late autumn leaves were drifting lazily to the ground, and I remembered the first time I had planted the roses near the porch, careful to space them evenly, nurturing them as I had nurtured my children. Those moments had felt simple then, but now they were part of a larger tapestry of effort and care. Threads that my family seemed determined to unravel without understanding the cost. Alex's laughter drifted faintly from the living room, Peter chiming in with his casual remarks. My parents' soft murmurs punctuated the air as they moved about. Oblivious to the quiet storm gathering in the middle of their home, I let them think I was lost in grief or bewilderment, a woman adrift. They underestimated me, as they always had. I continued, each movement deliberate, each item placed in a box with careful attention. I was building more than a pile of possessions. I was reclaiming control. The silence of my actions spoke louder than any argument or shout ever could. It was a silence rooted in experience, in clarity, in the understanding that those who take for granted the devotion of others rarely anticipate the quiet reckoning of someone who has survived much and endured more. By the time the last box was taped shut, I felt a subtle shift in myself, a solidification of purpose. The room was emptier, but the weight of determination was stronger than any sorrow. I stepped back, surveying the space I had occupied with so much care and seeing it now as a stage for the choices that would follow. My hands were steady, my mind clear, and beneath it all, a quiet certainty had settled I would not be broken. The boxes lined the hall like markers of intent, a physical representation of my resolve. I paused for a moment, breathing deeply, the familiar sense of the house grounding me. They believed I was defeated, that the eviction had shattered me. They were wrong, and soon they would see just how wrong they had been. I lingered just outside the living room. The boxes I had packed earlier stacked neatly in the hall, a silent testament to my resolve. The sounds of conversation drifted through the air, casual at first, but then I caught Alex's voice, carrying clearly, deliberate, and brimming with self-satisfaction. And I finally closed the deal, he was saying, his tone light, almost boastful. Can you believe it, Mom's house? All hers. And I'm using it to fund my birthday, cover the caterers, even a few personal expenses. It's perfect. Peter laughed softly from his chair, the sound low, conspiratorial. Smart move. She'll never see it coming, always so quiet. But you know she's too set in her ways to challenge us. I pressed my back against the doorway, pretending to be distracted, my fingers idly smoothing the edge of a box. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with clarity. The words repeated themselves in my mind, settling into the quiet spaces I had carved out over decades of experience. Alex had made a mistake. He had revealed too much. I could hear my mother's soft voice interjecting, polite, measured, almost a sigh. She'll adjust. Peter, she always does. Their casual assumption of my compliance, their confidence that I would quietly accept whatever they chose to impose, it was a miscalculation of monumental proportions. I let them continue. Each boast, each casual remark, sink in fully. Alex's arrogance, Peter's laughter, my parents' calm detachment. They believed they were secure, invulnerable. They had exposed their plans without realizing I was listening, without considering that I had already begun to plan my own response. I traced the edges of the letter in my hand, the eviction notice still tucked safely away in my pocket. Every detail of their conversation reinforced what I had already felt in my bones: opportunity. A chance to turn the situation, to shift the balance of power in a way that would be precise, deliberate, and undeniable. My mind began mapping the pieces. Alex had spoken freely about the house, about the sale, about the funds he intended to extract. He had provided the timeline, the motivations, and the assumptions behind each action. Peter had inadvertently reinforced the narrative, highlighting their belief that I would remain passive. Even my parents, with their quiet murmurs, confirmed that they underestimated me once again. I felt a subtle thrill, a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with vengeance, yet everything to do with control. Knowledge is power, and I now held more than any of them imagined. The details I had overheard: dates, amounts, intended uses formed a roadmap of their strategy. And a roadmap is only useful when someone knows how to navigate it. I allowed myself a small, measured smile. I could move in silence, observe, gather information, and wait for the precise moment to act. They had laid out their weaknesses, spoken freely of their plans, and assumed their assumptions were unchallenged. But assumptions, I reminded myself, are fragile constructs, and those built on ignorance are destined to collapse. As their voices drifted further into the room, lighter now, less guarded, I let my attention wander for a moment to the sunlit hallway, the boxes, neatly stacked. The packed memories, they were ready, and so was I. I had listened, absorbed, and understood. The path forward was becoming clear, each step calculated, each move deliberate. I pressed myself back slightly against the doorway, a ghost in the periphery, unseen yet fully aware. The power I now possessed wasn't loud or threatening, it was quiet, methodical, and lethal in its precision. They didn't know I was aware, but I knew everything they had said. And in that awareness, I found my advantage, my leverage. And the first flicker of satisfaction that comes from knowing the game is already in motion, even if the other players are blind to it. I sat at the kitchen table long after the family had drifted into other rooms, the hum of conversation fading into distant background noise. The eviction notice lay folded neatly beside my cup of tea, untouched but present, a constant reminder of the betrayal I had witnessed. My mind replayed Alex's boasts, Peter's chuckles, and the quiet murmurs of my parents. Every word they had spoken now carried a weight I hadn't fully appreciated until I began reviewing the documents again. I pulled the stack of paperwork closer, scanning each page with deliberate care. Mortgage agreements, title transfers, signatures, dates. My eyes traced the lines, noting the precision, the small inconsistencies that had seemed trivial at the time, but now leapt off the page. The sale of my house had been announced, celebrated by Alex as a triumph, yet a single clause caught my attention, a requirement for my personal signature to finalize the transfer. My breath caught. I reread the section slowly, letting the implications sink in. The buyer could not complete the transaction without my confirmation in person. The bank demanded it, a safeguard that had been carefully overlooked. Alex had assumed everything was settled, that my absence, my compliance, and his forged signature would be sufficient. He had miscalculated. I ran a hand over my face, the warmth of frustration mingling with the sharp edge of clarity. This wasn't just a mistake, it was an opportunity. The loophole was small, technical, almost invisible to anyone who hadn't studied the documents with the same meticulous eye I had developed over decades of managing my own life and finances. It was the gap that could shift the entire balance, the key to turning their confidence against them. I leaned back in my chair, thinking of Alex's arrogance, of Peter's smug comments, of my parents' calm detachment. They had spoken freely, revealing their intentions, their assumptions, and their timeline. And they had failed to account for me, not the woman they thought I was, quiet and compliant, but the one who had built a home with her own hands, who had navigated bureaucracy, contracts, and financial obstacles before breakfast. I had the knowledge, and now the leverage. The possibility filled me with a quiet exhilaration. I didn't rush, didn't act impulsively. This wasn't about immediate retaliation. It was about precision, strategy, and timing. I imagined the scenarios Alex presenting the papers, expecting me to sign without question, unaware that the contract would falter, that the transfer would be voided, that their certainty would crumble in the most unexpected moment. I allowed myself a small, deliberate smile. Years of patience, of learning to read situations, to anticipate outcomes, and to measure my reactions, had led me to this moment. The loophole was not merely a technicality. It was a manifestation of every lesson life had taught me about vigilance, perseverance, and understanding people's assumptions. I pulled the papers closer again, reviewing each clause, each date, each line that could be leveraged. The weight of responsibility settled on me, but it was no longer oppressive. Instead, it was empowering. The opportunity required calm, careful execution, and patience. I could see the path clearly now, one step at a time, from knowledge to action. By the time I set the papers down, I felt a resolve settle over me, firm and deliberate. The sale wasn't complete. The contract could be contested. The bank required verification. One overlooked detail, invisible to Alex and underestimated by the rest, had become my advantage. And I would use it. I closed my eyes briefly, picturing the next moves, the timing, the method. The loophole wasn't just a legal technicality. It was the key to reclaiming what had been taken and to revealing to them, in a way they could never ignore, the cost of underestimating me. I spent the next morning alone in my study, the sunlight spilling across my desk, illuminating the neatly stacked folders I had prepared the night before. The eviction notice and related documents lay beside my laptop, their weight both literal and symbolic. Every page I had gathered, every detail I had noticed in the sale contract, now demanded further scrutiny. I was no longer reacting. I was planning. The first call was to the bank. I introduced myself as a legal assistant for the seller, keeping my voice steady, casual, and disinterested. I asked about the transfer process, about pending verification, about any obstacles the bank required for the completion of the sale. Every answer was logged meticulously, each detail filed in my mind as well as on paper. The representative was thorough, polite, and entirely unaware that the owner sitting across from them was the very person whose signature was required to finalize the transaction. Next, I reached out to the buyer, posing as a friendly intermediary. I asked about their timeline, their expectations, and the documentation they had received. They shared freely, confident in the process, unaware of the complications that would soon surface. Each word they spoke, each assumption they expressed, became a building block in my mental map of the sale. Researching Alex's previous actions took time. I pulled up old contracts, letters, and bank records, cross-referencing signatures and noticing discrepancies he had assumed I would overlook. A forged signature here, a procedural shortcut there. Small things that now revealed themselves to be crucial errors on his part. He had acted hastily, assuming that confidence and speed could substitute for legality. He had underestimated my attention to detail. I kept meticulous notes, each one a small triumph of clarity over chaos. Dates, names, amounts, phone numbers, and procedural requirements were all cataloged with precision. I revisited the clauses I had identified in the contract, noting which elements would allow me to challenge the sale, what technicalities could invalidate the transfer, and which steps the buyer or the bank could not circumvent. Every call, every inquiry, every piece of research was approached deliberately, as though moving pieces on a chessboard. I didn't rush. Impulsivity had never served me well. Patience and attention to detail were my allies, and I used them to gather power quietly, methodically, without anyone suspecting the strategy forming in the quiet corners of my study. Hours passed, and by late afternoon, I leaned back in my chair, reviewing the information I had accumulated. Alex's overconfidence had been his undoing. He had spoken too freely, exposed his assumptions, and created a trail of evidence that I could follow step by step. The bank, the buyer, even my family's casual confidence, all of it now worked in my favor. Provided I acted with precision, I allowed myself a small, measured smile. They had assumed that removing me from the process would be sufficient, that my absence equaled consent. They had not considered that I could observe, analyze, and plan. Even while appearing to step aside, I had learned decades ago that knowledge is power, and now I held more of it than any of them could imagine. I closed my laptop and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle comfortably on my shoulders. The plan was no longer abstract. It had tangible steps, a sequence of actions that could be executed with care and patience. Every piece of intelligence I had gathered was a tool, a key to turning their assumptions and arrogance into their own undoing. The sun dipped lower, casting a warm glow through the study window. I stood, stretching, and looked around my home, imagining the coming days. Each brick, each polished surface, each memory embedded in the walls reminded me why I had fought so hard for this place. I had built it, protected it, and now I would defend it not with rage, but with deliberate, unwavering strategy. Every step I had taken, every call I had made, every piece of information I had secured had one purpose: to protect what was rightfully mine, and to do so with a quiet authority they could never anticipate. I spent the morning reviewing my notes again. The pages spread across the dining table like a battlefield map. Every detail I had gathered, every conversation I had overheard, every clause in the contract formed a framework for the steps I was about to take. The key now was timing. The plan could succeed, but only if executed at the precise moment. Alex's birthday was approaching, and the celebration would bring everyone together under one roof, the perfect opportunity. He had already boasted to Peter and my parents about the event, about the venue, about the arrangements. Their confidence was palpable. Their expectation that I would be absent, compliant, or unaware, unwavering. They didn't know I was aware. No, I was. They didn't know that I had been preparing, quietly and meticulously, for weeks. I imagined the party in my mind, picturing the decorations, the laughter, the clink of glasses, the music filling the air. It would be festive, joyful, full of anticipation for Alex's milestone year, and it would be the stage for the quiet, methodical work I had set in motion. Every piece of information I had gathered would come into play. Every misstep Alex had made would be revealed at the moment it mattered most. I moved deliberately, packing a small kit of documents, copies of the contract, notes from my calls, everything I might need to activate the loophole. Each item was placed carefully, with thought, with purpose. I reviewed the steps in my mind, ensure the contract's clauses are highlighted, confirm the timing aligns with the bank's verification process, prepare to appear calm and composed among the unsuspecting guests. The thrill wasn't in revenge itself, but in control, in precision. I had spent decades learning to measure my reactions, to plan for contingencies, to anticipate the unforeseen. Now all of that experience converged, guiding my hands and my mind toward a single deliberate action. The birthday party would be the perfect moment, not because of spectacle, but because of opportunity. I pictured Alex, arriving with his confident grin, shaking hands with guests, unaware of the storm approaching under the surface of my calm. He would expect me to remain passive, to acquiesce quietly, to be relegated to a polite observer in his celebration. They had all assumed my compliance, assumed I would be as predictable as they believed, and yet I would not be predictable. I would move with the same care, the same patience, and the same quiet precision that had guided me through years of challenge, through the construction of this home, through the sacrifices and the hard-earned lessons of my life. They would see only what I allowed them to see, and when the time came, the shift would be undeniable. I set the papers aside and stood by the window, looking out over the garden where the late afternoon sunlight touched the porch and the roses I had planted years ago. Each petal reminded me of the patience and care required to nurture something into fruition, and I thought of how carefully I had nurtured every detail of this plan. Timing was everything, as it had always been in life, and now it would be everything in this moment. I closed my eyes and allowed a slow, steady breath, feeling the weight of preparation settle into quiet confidence. The party would arrive. The guests would mingle, and I would be ready. The plan was in place. The moment chosen. The stage set. It was not haste that would deliver justice, but careful calculation, and I had waited long enough for it to be perfect. With the timing established and the strategy fixed, I felt a calm resolve fill me. Every step that had led to this day, the sacrifices, the observation, the gathering of knowledge culminated in this. Soon, everything would align exactly as it needed to, and the assumptions my family had made about me would be exposed in the most telling way. The day of Alex's birthday arrived with a crisp clarity, sunlight spilling over Charleston rooftops and reflecting off the polished streets. I dressed carefully, selecting a dress of deep navy that spoke of elegance and composure. My hair was swept back neatly, my posture deliberate, every movement measured. I did not rush. I walked with the quiet confidence of someone fully aware of the power they held beneath the surface. When I arrived at the venue, a rented hall lavishly decorated for the occasion, I paused for a moment at the threshold. The music, the laughter, the gleam of glass and silver, it all felt surreal. Families mingled. Children darted about, and Alex was at the center, radiant with excitement. Unaware of the storm gathering in plain sight, I allowed a soft, controlled smile to grace my lips, masking the calculation behind my eyes. Stepping inside, I felt the familiar rush of attention settle subtly upon me. Guests glanced in my direction, some recognizing me from past holidays, others noting the quiet authority in my bearing. I returned each smile with a measured nod, letting them believe I was merely a polite attendee, a mother and grandmother content to observe the festivities. No one suspected that I had read every document, overheard every plan, and calculated every step that would soon shift the course of the evening. Alex approached, his grin as confident and assured as ever. "Mom," he said warmly, extending his hand. "I didn't think you'd make it." I shook his hand, letting my expression remain neutral, calm, almost approving. "Of course," I said lightly. "Wouldn't miss it." He laughed, a little too self-assured, and returned to his guests. Oblivious to the scrutiny I applied to every detail of the hall, every line of conversation, every movement that might provide the opening I had prepared for. Peter and his fiancée drifted past, exchanging polite words, neither noticing the subtle shift in my energy. My parents were seated at a corner table, nodding to acquaintances, but their eyes occasionally flicked toward me, unaware that the calm exterior I projected belied a mind actively orchestrating the next steps. They assumed I was silent, compliant, uninvolved. They had underestimated the patience and precision I carried in my years. I moved through the crowd with grace, observing the arrangement of guests, the timing of speeches, the placement of gifts, every glance, every laugh. Every toast was noted, cataloged, and mentally cross-referenced against the information I had gathered. It was a delicate balance, appear present but passive, friendly but detached, graceful but fully alert. I let the warmth of the room wash over me while keeping my attention sharp, every sense attuned to the unfolding dynamics. A few children ran past, bumping into tables, and I smiled briefly at their energy, letting the world see a mother's gentle amusement. Beneath that calm exterior, my heart burned quietly. Focused, deliberate, the opportunity, the leverage, the plan, all of it was now in place, waiting for the precise moment to unfold. I paused near the refreshment table, letting Alex pass by, chatting with a cousin, completely unaware of the awareness I carried like a shield. They had assumed control, assumed victory, assumed that my calm was the product of ignorance or helplessness. They had not counted on the patience, knowledge, and resolve I had built over decades. And so I moved among them, untouchable in appearance, my smile steady, my demeanor elegant, every step measured. I was present, engaged, yet entirely separate from their assumptions. Beneath the surface, the fire of focus and determination blazed quietly, waiting. I was no longer the observer of my family's mistakes. I was the strategist, poised to act at the exact right moment, ensuring that the weight of their arrogance would be fully realized. Alex moved through the room with the ease of someone convinced he had already won. His laughter carried across the hall, bright and confident, punctuated by jokes and stories about the sale of my house. He gestured broadly as he recounted the details, unaware of the careful eyes tracking his every word. Peter stood beside him, nodding approvingly, a smug grin that seemed to widen with every boast. My parents sat nearby, their polite smiles masking an undercurrent of pride at Alex's cleverness, a shared assumption that everything had gone exactly as they intended. Their confidence was palpable, and it should have unsettled me. Instead, I let myself relax into the calm I had cultivated over the weeks of planning. I sipped from my glass of water, letting my gaze drift across the room, taking in the arrangement of guests, the sparkle of decorations, the clink of silverware, all the while noting the rhythm of conversation and the flow of attention. Their overconfidence was evident in every gesture, the ease of their posture, the casual repetition of details they assumed were secure, the way Alex's eyes darted from face to face, basking in the approval he expected to receive. I allowed a faint smile to curve my lips. It wasn't a smile of anger or glee. It was the quiet acknowledgement of knowledge, of control. I knew more than any of them suspected. Each word Alex uttered, each confident statement he made was a thread I could follow, a piece of the map I had been constructing for weeks. The contract's vulnerabilities, the timing of verification, the assumptions they had made about my compliance all aligned perfectly beneath the surface of this festive hall. Guests leaned in to hear Alex, laughing at his anecdotes, nodding at his insight, and I observed without interruption. The warmth of the room, the chatter, the clinking glasses, it all served as a backdrop to the real drama unfolding silently in my mind. I did not need to speak. The plan was already in motion, and every boast reinforced the path I had chosen. Peter made a casual remark about the house, confirming in passing the timeline Alex had already disclosed. My parents added small comments, revealing the assumptions they believed unchallengeable. None of them realized that I was absorbing every detail, storing every word, calculating each next step. Their arrogance, their pride, was exposing the very weaknesses they thought were hidden. I thought of all the years I had invested in this home, in this family, in every small sacrifice that had gone unnoticed. And I understood, with absolute clarity, that their confidence, their expectation of my submission, was a gift in itself. They had provided me with the information I needed, freely, without suspicion, allowing me to prepare with precision. I let my eyes meet Alex's briefly, his gaze full of self-assurance, and I allowed that faint, subtle smile to linger. He thought he had achieved victory, that the day, the house, and my silence were entirely in his control. He had no idea that his confidence, so visible and loud, was guiding me toward the moment when all assumptions would be undone. I moved slowly through the room, casually greeting guests, maintaining the appearance of warmth and engagement, while the fire of intent burned quietly beneath my composure. Every laugh, every boast, every glance of overconfidence was a reminder they had underestimated me. And when the moment came, they would understand just how profoundly. I waited until the moment felt right. The room buzzing with celebration, guests laughing, glasses clinking, and Alex boasting with the same unguarded confidence I had watched so carefully. My hands were steady, my posture relaxed, my expression calm. But beneath the surface, every muscle was coiled with intent. I had prepared meticulously, every detail aligned, every step accounted for. The legal loophole I had discovered weeks ago was now in my hands, ready to be activated with precision. The contract that Alex had believed complete, that he had flaunted as his victory, was fragile, contingent on my signature and the timing of bank verification. He had assumed compliance, overlooked the requirements, and that mistake would now define the outcome. I reached for the documents I had brought with me, subtle in my movements, careful not to draw attention. Each page was arranged as I had rehearsed the copies of the contract, the notes from my calls with the bank and the buyer, and the marked clauses that would nullify the transfer. I had double-checked every detail, confirming that the bank's verification protocol required my personal authorization. One overlooked technicality, invisible to Alex and his accomplices, would undo their assumptions entirely. I moved gracefully toward the edge of the crowd, blending seamlessly with the guests, and positioned myself near the space where Alex had been presenting the details of his plan. He continued to speak confidently, unaware that the power dynamic had shifted. I allowed him to continue. Let him repeat the information that had been so carefully relayed to me, each word reinforcing the inevitability of his own undoing. When the moment arrived, I approached the designated bank representative, who had been casually observing the proceedings. I presented myself as the authorized party, calm and composed, and provided the necessary verification in person. There was no hesitation. No dramatics, only the quiet assertion of authority. The representative reviewed the documents, verified the details, and processed the necessary updates. In that silent exchange, the contract's fate was sealed. I stepped back, allowing the natural flow of the party to continue, while internally noting the shift. Alex's confidence remained intact on the surface, yet the foundation of his assumptions was already crumbling. The loophole had been activated precisely as I had planned. The contract was invalid, the transfer effectively nullified, and every expectation he had held of a seamless victory was now impossible. I observed him from a distance, noting the subtle signs. I had anticipated a slight hesitation in his speech, a flicker of doubt in his eyes, the brief tightening of his jaw. He had believed himself untouchable, secure in the knowledge that I would comply, that my silence equaled consent. But he had forgotten the lessons embedded in years of underestimation. I had learned patience, observation, and timing. I had learned that quiet, deliberate action often carries more weight than any outburst of anger. As the evening continued, I allowed the guests to mingle, to celebrate, unaware of the technical undoing that had quietly unfolded. My revenge was precise, silent, and complete in its method. It required no dramatic confrontation, no raised voice, no spectacle. It required only foresight, careful calculation, and the knowledge that their assumptions had made them vulnerable. I returned to my place among the guests, greeting familiar faces with measured warmth, a faint smile on my lips. Alex continued, oblivious, unaware that every claim of triumph had already been reversed. The room buzzed with celebration, yet the tension, imperceptible to anyone else, was absolute. The balance of power had shifted quietly, and I held the control, unseen but undeniable. For the first time that evening, I felt the satisfaction of justice executed perfectly, not loud, not dramatic, but certain and complete. The years of careful observation, of patience, of enduring betrayal without reaction, had culminated in this precise moment. I remained calm, composed, and untouchable on the surface, while underneath, the meticulous orchestration of every detail ensured that the consequences would reach exactly where they were deserved. The laughter and chatter of the party carried through the grand hall, vibrant and carefree, until the sharp click of heels on the polished floor drew everyone's attention. 3 figures entered, crisp in uniform and professional attire, 2 police officers and a bank investigator, their presence immediately commanding the room's focus. Conversations faltered, music dipped, and every eye slowly turned toward them. Alex's voice froze mid-sentence, his grin faltering. He looked at me, then at the approaching trio, his confidence unraveling in real time. The smug assurance he had carried all evening was gone, replaced by a sudden, visible panic. I remained seated, calm, letting the moment unfold with deliberate patience. My hands folded neatly in my lap. The bank investigator stepped forward, documents in hand, and addressed the crowd. "This is regarding a property transaction involving Eleanor Whitaker," he said, his tone formal, unwavering. "Evidence indicates the contract for the house was executed fraudulently, including a forged signature and procedural violations that render the sale invalid." A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Alex's face drained of color. Peter's smirk vanished as he realized the gravity of the situation. My parents' polite composure faltered. Their eyes widened with disbelief. I remained still, my calm demeanor unbroken, the faintest trace of a smile playing at the corners of my lips. I had prepared for this, anticipated every reaction, and now it was unfolding exactly as planned. Alex stammered, words failing him, his hands reaching out instinctively. I don't understand," he whispered, voice trembling. He had counted on secrecy, on assumptions, on the silence he believed I would maintain. All of it had collapsed in the span of moments, under the weight of careful documentation and precise timing. The officers moved swiftly, approaching Alex with quiet authority. "You are required to come with us for questioning regarding the fraudulent property transfer," one said, his tone firm. The realization hit him fully. He was not merely embarrassed, he was caught, exposed, accountable. Guests murmured, some rising from their seats, others clutching at their drinks, all witnessing the unraveling of what had been assumed to be a flawless plan by Alex and the family. Peter's fiancée clutched at his arm, eyes wide, while my parents exchanged a brief, horrified glance. The room was suspended in disbelief. The celebratory energy drained, replaced by the weight of public humiliation. I watched, silently, as Alex was escorted toward the exit. The once confident young man who had boasted freely, who had assumed the house and the evening were firmly under his control, now stumbled under the consequences he had never anticipated. Every boast, every careless word he had spoken, every assumption he had made, had contributed to this precise, undeniable moment of exposure. The party continued around us in a muted, tentative fashion, the air thick with tension and uncertainty. Conversations had ceased, replaced by whispers of shock and disbelief. The celebratory atmosphere I had entered hours earlier had transformed into a theater of reckoning, one where assumptions and arrogance were laid bare for all to see. I allowed myself a subtle sigh of satisfaction, not out of malice, but out of acknowledgement that justice, quiet and methodical, had arrived. The family had underestimated me, had assumed my compliance, and had now witnessed the consequences of their overconfidence. The house, the transaction, the authority I had reclaimed, all of it stood firm while the chaos around them confirmed the precision of the plan I had set into motion. As Alex's shoulders slumped and the officers led him away, I remained seated, calm and composed, a silent observer to the fallout I had orchestrated. The room had changed in a way that words could not capture, and I felt the weight of the evening settle over me not as triumph, but as quiet, unwavering justice executed flawlessly. The drive back to Charleston was quiet, the streets bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon sun. I sat behind the wheel, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, feeling the gentle rhythm of the city around me. The house, my home, came into view, its familiar silhouette framed by the golden light. I realized I had missed this sight more than I had allowed myself to admit, more than I had acknowledged while caught in the tension of the last few days. I stepped out of the car and inhaled deeply. The familiar scent of polished wood, the faint aroma of lingering autumn leaves, and the comforting hum of neighborhood life surrounding me. Everything was exactly as I had left it, yet nothing was the same. I unlocked the door, feeling the solid, familiar resistance of the key, and stepped inside. The rooms welcomed me, carrying echoes of decades of life, quiet mornings, reading by the window, late nights, marking papers at the desk, laughter and conversation from holidays long past. Every detail reminded me that this home was more than walls and furniture. It was the embodiment of my persistence, my patience, and my unwavering will. I set down the boxes I had brought back with me, still packed from the preparations of the recent upheaval. Each item felt lighter now, not because the memories were diminished, but because the weight of obligation, expectation, and betrayal had lifted. I had endured, observed, and acted with careful deliberation. And now the house and I were whole again. Sitting for a moment in the living room, I let my eyes roam across the familiar spaces, the polished floors, the sunlight filtering through the windows, the cozy corners where I had spent countless hours planning and dreaming. I realized how much I had grown, how much patience and strategy had been required to navigate not just the legal intricacies of the house, but the delicate intricacies of family dynamics. I thought of Alex, of Peter, of my parents, and the assumptions they had made, their confidence, their arrogance, their belief that they could take what they wanted without consequence had been shattered. And yet, my focus was not revenge, it was understanding, boundaries, and empowerment. I had acted, yes, but I had done so from a place of clarity and calm, not impulse or rage. I moved through the rooms, touching the familiar surfaces, allowing myself to feel the full weight of return. Love without respect, I realized, is fleeting. Loyalty cannot be demanded. It must be earned. And when those lessons are learned too late by others, it is neither my loss nor their gain. It is simply the truth I have long understood. I paused by the window, looking out over the garden where the roses still bloomed despite the chill of early evening. The house was mine, not by law or by coincidence, but by years of dedication, by resilience, by the conscious choice to build and protect it. In that moment, I felt a peace I had not known I was capable of, a quiet, unshakable sense of control and self-possession. I settled into the armchair by the fireplace, letting the soft warmth of the room surround me. The events of the past days no longer threatened me. I had reclaimed what was mine, not through force, but through careful strategy, patience, and an unwavering sense of purpose. The house was more than a home. It was a testament to the strength that remains when betrayal ends, when boundaries are asserted, and when dignity is restored.